So this is a general introduction to the Consciousness in the Brain course, and knowing that a number of you are not here present, most of you aren't, and most of you are taking it online, I thought maybe recording this first session would be worthwhile. So it's very informal, and and what I want to do is sort of run over the syllabus, talk about that for 15 or 20 minutes. It's not going to be a long session. And then we can open it for questions and stuff. So I'm not really used to using this device, so we'll see how this works. This is essentially a readings course, and it's set up with one or two readings a month. And if you look at the syllabus, I'm going to give you the schedule. You'll see that what I have set up is two books about once a month and ask you to choose one. Although you can choose them both if you want, or you can choose some other things if you want too, but we're going to focus on two books at a time, and we'll have about, I said a month, we'll have about 2 weeks on each set of two books. And what I would like you to do is pick one of them and read it or read at it. And some of these books are fairly large. Almost none of them are difficult to read, but my idea is not that you will go through these line by line, underlining and memorizing. It's that you'll spend time with the book, reading the parts of interest and deriving. Are you signed up for the course?
Consciousness in the Brain?
Yeah, pull up over here. So I'm just doing a quick introduction. And I've got syllabi here. So we will read the two books, or one of the two books, in each, I guess, in 2-week units. I have to get the syllabus out, but I'll ask you to choose one of the books and read it, or read at it. If you want to read at both the books, it's fine. I tried to every time give two options just for variability, and usually one of the books is more technical than the other, and they represent sort of two different kinds of ideas. So it's basically a reading course. I'm fairly comfortable and relaxed with which books you pick. You can pick both of them. You can bring other books in if you like. So we'll do reading, we'll do some, and then we'll have discussions online. I would like everyone that takes the course to appear online at Caucus at least a couple times a week and announce yourself, have something to say. It doesn't have to be profound, doesn't have to be long, but here I am. I've been reading such and such, and I found such and such interesting or not interesting, or I don't like this, or I do like that, and just a few words, few sentences, just to keep in touch with the rest of the class and to keep the process flowing. I'm not fishing for long essays. In fact, I don't want long essays online because who wants to read them? A paragraph or two at the most. And if you have more to say, you can write along. Yeah, you laugh, but we have students that'll, we've had trouble with students sort of losing their private life because all they do is sit online and type, and it's like they don't even have time to read anymore. I think it was Alfonso said, no more of that. The paragraph is fine. If you have you want to write the great American novel, you can kind of put that in as an attachment or something. But basically what we want to have is just a friendly dialogue where you check in 2 or 3 times a week, and that's fine. And if you don't get there 2 or 3 times, at least once or twice, so we know you're live and that you're involved, and that's the idea of it. And then it's really helpful if you say something about what really interests you. I've already set up the course website. In our first book, we're all reading, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And I've set that up with several sections. The book has 4 sections. And I've set it up asking you to make a comment on each section as you read them. One section is on losses, neurological losses. One section is upon things like, he calls them transports, like when old folks that hear memory and somehow it carries them back to their youth or becomes very real. Excesses, like I'm trying to remember what it's called. There's a condition that Sachs was quite interested in which people have tics, really bad tics, and in Jerks. And one of the characters in the book got so bad with this. Anybody remember what the disease is?
Tourette's.
Tourette's, yeah. He could hardly function, but yet at night he would go play in a jazz band. He played the drums. So he was able to work things out. So he took the medicine in the daytime and went to the office, and at night he would become a drummer. So that's one of the excesses, and there's a whole section of this. It's quite interesting. And then there's a final section about the simple, and I've written several letters about this because the term was a little offensive to one of my previous classes. And I had to bear in mind that Sachs is from England. This was written in the 80s, and the simple it was just the word for people who now we call mentally challenged. But England is different. I was in Cambridge not too long ago, eating in a little cafe, and there was a big sign up. It said "lame toilet" in the back, and lame toilet. What's a lame toilet like? I'm not sure I even want to go there. But they call disabled people lame. That's just the word they use over there, and maybe they're improving now. But so that was part of the way he used the language there. So I would like you to read at the book. I think you'll find it quite engaging. And I'm not asking anyone to read cover to cover. I'm not giving multiple choice tests on these. But then in 2 weeks, we'll move on to the next selection. For example, I can mention that right now. I'd like you to pick either The Brain That Changes Itself or The Brain, The Story of You. And this is a good example. Now you can read them both if you want. But this is a good example of how I've tried to divvy up these books. The Brain That Changes Itself is a very readable book, and it really changed my whole view of the brain. It's about 10 years old now, but I was just dumbfounded by it. I mean, when I took courses in neurology back in the day, even spinal injuries never repaired themselves, and certainly nothing in the brain ever changed after childhood or early childhood. And Dodge in this book, however you say his name, has shown that all kinds of things can change. And he's got stories in there just dumbfounding. Amazing improvement people have made in all kinds of different ways. And it hasn't been done much in the past because people didn't think it was possible. This is an example of neurodiversity and especially neuroplasticity that goes beyond anything you might imagine. He basically argues that there's very few things that can't be improved, but it takes a lot of practice. And he says people typically quit just before the changes occur. So, for example, I injured my Achilles tendon in Italy about 3 years ago. And so I hobbled around because I had this sore Achilles tendon. And it finally got well, but as of about a year ago, everybody realized I was getting old and couldn't walk right anymore. So I was walking like this all the time. And it was only about a month ago that I realized that I'm just walking like I still have an Achilles tendon issue. So it's really hard for me to walk normally now, but I make myself do it. I make myself stand up, lift both feet off the ground. I mean, this sounds simple, but you watch old people walk, and that's the way I was walking. And I'm finding that my brain is changing, and I'm walking much more normally, and I expect to walk completely normally eventually. Well, that's a minor example of stories he tells in his books. So this is a whole new understanding of neuroscience, and it's very optimistic, and it's very relevant to a lot of things. He actually thinks everything from dyslexia to all sorts of physical problems can eventually be overcome by working with what's a malleable brain, but that people tend to give up just before the changes manifest. That's what happens. So we're on it for 10 months. They say, well, this doesn't do anything. And if they'd have stuck another couple of months, it would have gotten dramatic changes. So anyway, that's a great book. And also, Eagleman, David Eagleman, is one of the bright young men of neuroscience. Just an amazing guy, and he's very interested in prosthetic, incredible prosthetic stuff. You'll see him if you come to the Transformative Conference. I think he was there last year. He's got a guy that's blind who can practically play tennis, play badminton, can walk around just like you and I, and he does it all with echoes and with sound. And He's developed a device you can put on your tongue that stimulates your tongue very lightly, electrically, and if you're blind, you can navigate with this thing on your tongue. Um, and he's just a brilliant young man, and he's come up with several books about the brain, one or two novels as well. He's one of these remarkable people. There's a series of movies that I highly recommend. They were on PBS for a while, but I don't think they are now. You can buy the whole set for $17 or 1 hour. There's 6 1-hour shows called The Brain. This is one of his books. He has several. If you wanted one of the others, it would be fine. The only problem people have with Eagleman is that he's like most brilliant young neurologists. He considers everything to be in the brain. He has no tolerance for any other point of view, and sometimes students find that offensive. The way neuroscientists work is until they get about 50, they're absolute reductionists, absolute physicalists. And then when they get to be about 65 or 70, you start writing these books about religion. I could name one after another after another. Well, he's still a young guy. So where are we? What time is it? I'm not going as fast as I should, I guess. But anyway, so we got 2 weeks on that, and I just was myself absolutely amazed by the brain that changes itself. But the story of you, the brain, is a much more broad-based book, and it's a great resource as well. Oh, by the way, we've got all of these in a Dropbox, and beautiful PDF versions of them, because my assistant kindly and somehow he can get books. I don't know how he does it. He got all these books, got PDFs of these books, beautiful PDFs, and he tells me out of the 51 cases against professors giving away material like this for education, that like 50 of them have been won by the professors, so go ahead and use it. So we got this Dropbox. Even if you're not in the course, but you want to take it, if you write me an email, we'll invite you into the Dropbox. All these are now, they're PDFs, and they're good PDFs, by the way. They're very nice. I prefer a real book myself, but these are really good. And if you're a little handy with how to use PDFs, you can push it over into an iPad and even read it in iBooks, or just read it on the iPad. So I have a number of them like that. So no book costs unless you want to buy one. Even the one that's going to come up here in a minute, the Human Brain book, which is the next one of the next set, it's really a coffee table book with beautiful, beautiful illustrations. Yeah, well, he's got a PDF of this thing that's just graphically wonderful. I don't know how he did it. I'm not going to ask. So this period in the course, October, first 2 weeks in October, is the only time when we're really doing what I would call down and dirty text kinds of books. This one, the Human Brain book, is a coffee table book with beautiful illustrations, but also has a lot of function in it. And there's a lot of discussion of how the auditory system works, how the visual system works, with wonderful pictures, the cortex, how it's organized, and so on and so forth. And of course, even if you don't take the course, you're welcome to have a free copy. Don't sell it, that's all. And the other option is Presti, David Presti, a book called Foundational Concepts in Neuroscience. Now, this is a serious book by David Presti, who's a leading, in the biology department, leading neurobiologist at Berkeley. And he tried to write it so it would be accessible to a wide audience, but it is a book, a professional book. It's a great reference, and it's a great book to have around to look stuff up in. And it's much more, it's the closest thing to a textbook we have in this course. So that's the other book. So it's take one of those two and spend some time with it. And if you want to take both, you can. But you got 2 weeks. Maybe I put 3 weeks for this, actually, or 4. Forgive me. But I really wanted time to be able to spend with these books. And also, if you're taking the course for credit, there's a small midterm project required, maybe 10 pages or so. So this gives you a chance to organize and think about that a little bit. So I added more time. So this course sometimes seems to go very slow because I give quite a bit of time to these books. So you have time to read them, discuss them. The next book, there's an offline week. I don't know whether you realize, but most of you know probably that technically in this department we take every fourth week offline. And that's a free week, and that's a week to relax and recover. And sometimes our adjuncts don't know about this and they just charge ahead. Sometimes faculty just charge ahead, but we do have a policy that every fourth week is an offline week. And that's because of these clowns that you couldn't get them off the internet. And they weren't reading, they were just writing. Said, well, take a week off. Don't come around here. Take a week off, read, recover, and of course you can use it to catch up. So this is the offline week. I have an offline week every fourth week in my classes, and it's on the schedule. So you can use that to read more, to work on your projects, whatever you like. The books after that, there are two books. One's called The New Executive Brain, Frontal Lobes in a Complex World. Quite a nice book, and gives you quite an updated view of how the brain works. But the other one has been an enormously popular book, both of these. It's called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. It's quite a book, and it's a big, thick book. I don't need to want to read the whole thing, but this has been an incredibly popular book. Just everybody's been reading it. I did a lot of research on the left and right brain back in the day. Back in the day, in the 80s and 90s. I don't know how many publications I have. Many of them with students comparing left and right hemisphere, what we call hemispheric laterality, and so on. But I thought the whole topic had been exhausted, and either exhausted or poo-pooed or whatever, but it was way overdone at one point. But this book's a wonderful book, and he's revitalized the whole field. So difficult choice, because The New Executive Brain is a wonderful book too, written by, I can't hardly say his name, Goldberg, and I don't have it all written here. It's a long name. But students have been offended by his in-your-face reductionism as well, but you're going to do neurobiology, you have to live with neurobiologists, and they're almost all reductionists till they get old. Now, Goldberg's an interesting guy because he as a student, he worked under Alexander Luria, who's generally recognized as perhaps the greatest clinical neuropsychologist in history. He's Russian. First half of the 20th century, Oliver Sacks corresponded personally with him and was very proud of that fact, so you'll hear Luria mentioned several times in The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, correspondences with Luria and what Luria thought. Well, Goldberg was one of his students. Now, Luria was Jewish, but he was so famous that they left him alone. The Russians weren't very big on Jews. They were just one step behind the Germans in that regard, as many of you know. And Goldberg was Jewish too, as you might have thought maybe from his name, take a hint from that. So at some point, Goldberg decided he was going to come to the West. Now, getting out of Russia in those days wasn't so easy, and doing it without humiliating his teacher was even harder. So he couldn't do like, who was a great dancer before him? Nijinsky, how do you say? Yeah, Nijinsky, the Paris airport. He was told to take off running, and he did. And he ran down the steps, and the Parisian police were there and surrounded him. He said, "This man is in Paris. He's under our protection." And the Soviet spies all came around and said, No, leave him alone. He's in Paris. He has our protection. That's how he got out. So, but it was quite a stink, as you can imagine. Goldberg, what he did, because he didn't want to humiliate his teacher, as his respect for, is he got himself transferred all the way out to eastern Russia, out in Siberia, and he got a job in a morgue hauling bodies in and out at night. And he did this for like 2 or 3 years until he became an absolute nobody in Russia. And then he applied for a visa to come to the U.S., and of course they looked at it and they said, "Oh, this guy's a nobody, let him go to the U.S." And so that's how he got to the U.S. And then he became one of the premier brain scientists in the U.S. now. So I like his work. He's got 2 books that are fairly recent, and he has a different view of the left and right hemisphere than anybody else. It has to do with development and age, and he really looks at it differently. So those are both excellent books, although I have to say The Master and His Emissary has been the very popular one, and you may find it more relevant to your studies here. Then we go for Thanksgiving, eat a lot of turkey. And then we come back near the end of November, and there are two more books at the end. One's called How Emotions Are Made, and the other one is called Consciousness and the Social Brain. Okay, How Emotions Are Made. This is a very recent book by Lisa Barrett, who has wonderful interviews on YouTube, and I heard her on NPR, and she just amazed me. She's a Harvard psychologist, and she got interested in emotions. And if I get going, I'll just talk and talk. But basically, she's disproved everything everybody thought since Darwin's classic book, The Expression of Emotions in Animals and Men. She's been all over the world looking at emotions in different peoples and different cultures. And she's just rewritten the whole thing and rewritten the whole understanding of emotions. And she's very interested in facial expressions, how people express emotions, how you read emotions. You know, this guy in San Francisco, whose name maybe somebody remembers, I'm very bad with names, but he's made a career out of studying facial expressions. And he's very good at it. He can emulate almost anything. And he's trained spies and other people because he's the guy that discovered these micro expressions, that when people lie and stuff, would be this very quick. It's interesting, yeah. And she knows him, although she's corrected a number of his stuff. But as long as we're on this, I have to say it's fascinating. There's a wonderful movie a few years ago, a documentary called Frost Nixon, in which the TV interviewer, what's his name, Frost, who was sort of a low-key guy, interviewed Nixon in Australia after he resigned, and he got stuff out of Nixon nobody ever could get out of him. Nobody can figure out how he did it, because he's not a pro, really. He's a talk show guy. And they said, well, how did you ever, get to realize that Nixon was lying all the time and all this stuff? Well, he watched hours and hours and hours of Nixon speaking. And he was in the Nixon, Memorial Nixon Library, whatever the hell it is. And he's watching these things, and there's a control. He can control the speed. So he would have to go take a pee. I got to take a pee, so he'd slow the tape way down. And he'd come back, and Nixon's time was really slow. He started to notice these weird little expressions that would pop up, be too quick to see at normal speed. And then he began to realize that he was watching whenever Nixon lied. When he lied as much as Trump does, but he wasn't blatant with it. Trump doesn't care whether. Anyway, we'll go to Trump. Different story. That would be clinical psychology. We got to Trump. There's just a fascinating story about emotions, starting with Darwin's book, The Expression of Emotions in Animals and Men, which has drawings and so on. And then there were like 4 or 5 classic emotions that came out of this: anger, rage, fear, surprise, and so on. And these have been throughout the research for all these years, and it turns out they're different cultures. So she is just amazing, and she's got new ideas about everything from how to deal with autism to you name it. So I can't recommend her book too highly, and I can't recommend the interviews too highly. She's just very good. There's a last one that I don't like as well, but it's my own personal bias. It's Graziano. Anyway, Graziano, Graziano. He is the man nowadays, and he's often the person they call to talk about consciousness in the brain. He is an absolute reductionist, and he really has a kind of psychological theory of consciousness, which basically has to do with behavior and emulating expressions and so on. I just don't feel I could be an honest teacher and not include him, because he's the guy. I personally have a problem with him, but that's my personal problem, and he's highly regarded, and there are many tapes of him as well. In fact, some of the tapes of him are very good if you just watch the YouTube, because he'll get out a Muppet and he'll show you how emotions in a Muppet are like emotions in a person, and this behavioral approach he has works pretty well with Muppets, I guess. He's also got a theory based on information. Consciousness is related to the massive information in the nervous system. The theory I don't believe in at all, but it's very technical. So those are the books that we're going to read and discuss. Those of you taking the course for credit, if you're a doctoral level student, I would like to see a paper at the end of the course, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 pages, just more or less, quality paper, and it would be over something relevant to these books or relevant to the brain and consciousness that's of interest to you. And we can discuss that. If you're taking it as a master's course, 10-page paper would do, and that would be fine. A number of people are taking this course just to audit it, and if you're doing that, the general rule with audit is you don't need to write anything, except everybody has to participate in in the online section, but none of that gets graded or anything. It's all informal. And I have papers. Maybe I'll just eliminate these. I typically have thought papers due every week or two, and I think because this is such an informal course and there are a few of us and we're all going to be chummy, I think I'll just eliminate those, but would put a little bit more stress on your being in class and participating. In fact, I often end up saying, well, if you've posted enough thoughtful material, you don't need to write these anyway, and then it turns out over half the class does that. So let me just drop those and say don't worry about the thought papers, but do try to participate a little bit. I don't think you'll find it hard to read A Man Who Mistook His Hat. Some of those stories are very moving, and just to free write about one or two of them a little bit should be very easy. I mean, free writing's fun. My grandmother used to, this reminds me of my grandmother. She used to hear, the music when she was old. That's what some of the stories he has, I think, are wonderful. This one old lady would hear this music from her child. He has a lot about music. One of his first books was called A Leg to Dance, A Leg to Walk On, or something. But it was how he danced himself back from a stroke, and he's been very interested in music. So that about covers it. I'm going to stop the tape here. And those of you watching online, please email me. We can talk. We can Skype or call each other. I'm certainly available. It's a small class, and I want to be available. I want it to be friendly. But I'm going to stop the video right now. It's 27 minutes. You probably need to take a break. So thank you.